Hi, welcome back. This is week 11, video number 2. And in this video, we're going to look at strategies for writing letters and memos. So how we're actually going to build the content of letters and memos. The strategy for writing the content of a memo or a letter depends on the situation that you find yourself in. And all business writing situations can be boiled down to one of three situations. Either you're providing good news to somebody, so news that's going to please them, make them happy, make them excited. You're going to be providing neutral news to someone, which is a situation where you're going to give them information that's not going to make them feel one way or the other. And then the worst situation, when you have to deliver bad news to somebody about something. Our strategy, how we're actually going to write, is going to be based on what type of situation we're in. So the first step in any workplace writing situation is to take 30 seconds and think to yourself, is this good news for the person who's going to read it, neutral news for the person who's going to read it, or bad news for the person who's going to read it? Then you're going to vary your approach based on the situation. Good news and neutral news take something called the direct strategy. And this is very, very easy to do. You're going to be using a particular strategy that's very easy to write, and it's a 3-paragraph strategy that you're going to be using. In your first paragraph of your letter or memo, you're going to state the good or the neutral news, and you're going to do it directly. That's why they call it direct strategy. You're going to come right out and say it. In paragraph number 2, you're going to provide any additional information that's required by that person. And then in paragraph number 3, you're going to end with what we call a goodwill close. So an expression of appreciation, an offer to provide further assistance, contact information if that person needs to get back in touch with you, etc. And that's it. Okay, so we don't have to be fancy or flowery at all when we're providing good or neutral news. Think of some examples when people have communicated good or neutral news to you. And the classic example of a good news letter is the congratulations letter that you received when you were accepted to Niagara College. You may even still have that letter sitting somewhere, and you can take a look at it and you'll see it follows this particular strategy. It opens up with the first paragraph stating, congratulations, right? You have been accepted to the dental assisting program, or you have been accepted to the practical nursing program at Niagara College. The second paragraph, or the middle of the letter, is where they start giving you all the details that you need. So how you're going to register, by what date you have to make a deposit, how you pick up your textbooks, whatever, all of the additional information that you need to support that main message. And then at the end, right, they'll give you another compliment and say something nice to you, like we're looking forward to welcoming you to Niagara College, see you in September, okay, or something like that to close the letter. Classic situation where you are communicating good news. There's no one who's going to be upset by the fact that they've gotten into a program that they want to. Neutral news, we deal with neutral news all the time. So, for example, if you were writing a letter to place an order from a catalog, that would be neutral news, right? You're simply placing an order. It's not going to make somebody really happy. It's not going to make somebody really upset either. It's simple, neutral information. I've given you an example on Blackboard of a letter dealing with a neutral situation so you can actually see the strategy in action. So this is a letter where somebody is writing to someone at the Niagara College bookstore, letting them know that they need to order a certain number of scrubs for students. Okay? Neutral information. And you'll see, right, that while the information is complete, when you read through this particular letter, it's not flowery. It gets right to the point. It's direct in nature. Okay, so it's giving all of the information that's required to fulfill the order. Right? It ends with a goodwill close. It follows that exact example of the direct strategy. So direct strategy is very easy to write, okay? Again, the main things you want to do when you're using the direct strategy is make sure that you're including all of the important details, everything that that person's going to need to know, on the situation, and that's it. So direct and neutral news, very, very easy to write. The big one, though, is when we're talking about indirect strategy. And that's the one that we use for bad news information. So when we need to deliver bad news to someone, there's a certain art to it, I guess I should say, in terms of delivering that bad news. And the best example I can think of is thinking about how you break up with someone. So if you are breaking up with somebody and you've been with that person for a while and you're not angry, but you've just decided that this relationship needs to be over, you probably sit and think of a strategy for how you're going to handle the breakup. So imagine yourself, if you will, sitting at a Starbucks with that person and knowing that you need to let them know the relationship is over. You're probably going to automatically use what we call the indirect strategy, because you don't want that person to burst into tears or start yelling or make a huge scene in the Starbucks. You want to handle it with respect for them as a person, but you definitely still have to give them the bad information. If we map it out in terms of writing, the indirect strategy takes a 4-paragraph strategy. And in our first paragraph, we begin with what they call a buffer. And a buffer is simply a statement, can be a sentence or two, to start to lead somebody into some bad news. So we're not going to deliver the bad news right off the bat. So you would never sit down in front of somebody and say to them, it's over, goodbye, right? That's way too direct. Instead, right, you'd begin with a buffer. So using our same example, if you're breaking up with somebody, you might say something like, the past 5 years, we've had some good times and some bad times. Okay, so starting off with something neutral is a buffer. You're giving that person some emotional time to get ready. In paragraph number 2, you're going to provide the reasons for the bad news without stating it directly. So again, if I were breaking up with somebody, I might say, things have changed a lot. I've changed as a person. So start going through the reasons for the breakup, but I'm still not saying, excuse me, that this is a breakup. Paragraph number 3, I'm going to state the bad news as gently as I can. Okay, so again, right, if we take that example of the breakup, at some point I'm going to have to say, right, I don't want to see you anymore, okay, or I am not interested in being in a relationship with you anymore. You want to make sure that you do it gently, okay, so you don't want to cause victimization or upset people. They're not going to be happy. You can't turn an unhappy person into a happy person, but you can state bad news in a way that's gentle. And then in paragraph number 4, you're going to offer your goodwill close. And if there's an alternative, if it's possible to give somebody an alternative, do so. Okay? So again, if I were breaking up with somebody at the end of the conversation, I might say, thank you for everything these past 5 years. Okay? I wish you all the best in the future. Okay? Something, it indicates that the conversation is over, but it's still gentle, right? And it's still promoting goodwill. The breakup example, like I said, is a classic because, again, most people, right, know automatically or do it without even thinking the indirect strategy. But I want you to think now about a writing situation. And we talked about the college acceptance letter when we were talking about good news. So if we're talking about bad news, think about what Niagara College writes to people that are not accepted to a program, right? That's something that's going to be very, very upsetting, right, to people. They follow this exact format. So paragraph number 1, they would start with a buffer and they would say something neutral like, thank you for applying to Niagara College. Paragraph number 2, they're going to provide the reasons for the bad news. So they might say something like, each year we receive over 300 applications for our dental assisting program, right? Or something like, our practical nursing program is very competitive and only admits 50 students per term. Okay, so they're starting, right? And the person's getting an indication that this isn't going to be good news, but you're giving the reasons. Okay. Paragraph number 3 is where they're going to say, officially, we cannot accept you. So they might say something, they're going to try to say it gently. They might say something like, unfortunately, we cannot offer you admission to the practical nursing program at this time. Paragraph number 4 is where they're going to establish goodwill. So again, they're going to say something like, thank you for applying. There might be an alternative. Okay, so they might say, right, although our practical nursing program is full, right, you may wish to apply to our general arts and science program, okay, or our pre-health program. So they might give the person an alternative. Think again, too, about job application letters. So, a lot of jobs, right, what they do is they take in resumes and they take in job applications, and they never, ever get back to the person if they decide that they're not going to interview them. But for professional positions, job rejection application letters are a constant. Okay, so you apply for a job, they decide they're not going to interview you, they're not interested, but they will send you a letter back thanking you for applying and letting you know that they're not going to be calling you in for an interview. They follow this exact same format. Okay, so remember, it's a 4-paragraph structure that you're looking to do. I've also put up an example, okay, of a bad news memo this time. Okay, where somebody, a dentist, is writing to dental assisting staff, letting them know that layoffs are coming up. Okay, so if you take a look, you'll see that it opens with a buffer. It gives some reasons. It then delivers the bad news, and then it provides a goodwill close. Okay, so take a look at the example and see how it's crafted and see how it follows that exact strategy. Bad newsletters and using indirect strategy is difficult. Okay? It's hard. I'm not going to say it's easy. The best thing about doing this in written form, though, is that you don't have to think on your feet the same way that you do when you have an oral conversation with somebody and you need to give them bad news. Okay, you have more control when you're writing. So you can, sit and think for a few minutes about how to phrase something. Or you can rewrite a sentence if you reread it and it sounds a little harsh. Okay, so you have more room, right, to be able to play with how you're going to deliver that bad news versus having a bad news conversation with somebody face to face. Okay, I know personally, I prefer giving bad news in written format because I have that time to think. Okay, where if I have to do it with somebody face to face, again, like I've said, I got to think on my feet. Okay, and it's not as easy to do. So although it's difficult and painful to write bad newsletters, it does buy you more time. Okay, and it gives you more control and it lets you really be able to express what you need to express in the best way. Finally, just some general points to keep in mind when we're talking about workplace writing. Please remember that written communication never dies. So when you write something, even if it's in electronic format, that information never disappears. So you want to be very, very careful about what you put in written format and how you say things, because you never know when or how what you've written may reappear. You also want to remember when we're talking about the workplace that eyes other than the intended reader may see this document. So you might be writing a memo from yourself to somebody else that you're working with, but your boss may see that. Okay, so make sure again that you're thinking about a secondary audience as well, about what impression that person would form of you in addition to your reader. Remember that your professional reputation is on the line. So written communication is a reflection of who you are as a professional. So the type of DA that you are, the type of nurse or PSW that you are. All of this is reflected in the way that you write, okay? And especially in the way that you communicate bad news. The easiest way to get this right, especially when we're talking about bad news, is to put yourself in the reader's shoes. Put yourself in the reader's position. How would you like to get this information? So if somebody were breaking up with you, how would you want them to handle it? If somebody was rejecting you for a job that you had applied for, how would you want to hear it? If Niagara College had rejected you as a student, how would you want them to approach it? And if you think about yourself in that situation, it really helps you to develop empathy and to phrase things in a way that's not going to cause damage. You also want to ensure that when you're doing workplace writing, that you have absolutely zero errors in spelling, grammar, or punctuation. The reason is that people's writing ability is something that others use to judge them. So rightly or wrongly, okay, I won't get into the debate about whether it's a good thing to judge people or not. People do make judgments based on your writing, okay? They make judgments about your intelligence. They make judgments about your professionalism. They make judgments about your ability to pay attention to detail based on how you handle language, okay? So be very careful. Take time to proofread it. Read it over. Remember, too, that sometimes you can catch things, errors in writing, better on paper than on a screen. So try printing out a draft and then correcting it with a pen or a pencil. Remember as well that reading aloud oftentimes helps you catch errors in grammar and punctuation, so that if you actually hear the sentence spoken out loud, you'll be able to listen for stuff that sounds wrong, okay? And then finally, just as a piece of advice, never ever sign something that somebody else has written for you without reading it first. So if you get busy at work and your colleague says to you, hey, I'll write that letter for you, or I'll write that memo for you, you have a lot to do. Don't sign or initial it until you've read it. Because when you sign or initial a piece of workplace writing, you're taking personal and legal responsibility for the content of that particular letter or memo. So you don't want to end up in a bad situation, right? Where somebody complains about how you've handled a situation, or somebody accuses you of providing misinformation or incorrect information simply because you didn't read something. Okay. In our next video, we're going to talk about the assignment. You're going to be doing a workplace writing assignment. I'm going to warn you, this is not going to be easy. So I've given you some situations that are really kind of yucky and tough to deal with. So you might need to go get yourself a big cup of coffee before you take a look at this next assignment. I'll talk to you in the next video.